Good day, Professor Mabizela. You do know my name is Chancellor. I joined Rhodes University Psychology Department last year in August. I think I was interviewed in May. I've decided to record this video. Today is Wednesday, the 15th. It's just after 11 in the morning, 15th of May. I'm recording this for a couple of reasons, Prof. Some people might argue that it's to put my side of the story or to set the record straight as I have written an email. I'm sure you saw the email that I had written to Professor Msindo, and I copied you, and I intentionally did not copy your secretary. I copied you, and I introduced family representatives. That is Mr. Bongani Ndlovu, Mr. Mawetu Nzangani, and Mr. Tobela Chiula. I am mentioning them because they have no contract, either as workers or as professionals with Rhodes University. I'm the one who signed the contract with Rhodes University. However, the email that I wrote, in which I copied you, necessitated that I copy them because, as per the email, they represent the family. And I do appreciate that you may have seen the response to that email from Professor Msindo, the Dean of Humanities. After I had intimated on the email that would be my last email, he then responded, but you do appreciate that context. But maybe just before I go on to the meat of why this video, what's contained in this video, I hope that you also saw how my family representatives, through Mr. Bongani Ndlovu, tried to respond to a very difficult situation, very delicate situation, in which I am an employer, I'm an employee and a worker at Rhodes University, but obviously there are other family considerations. You probably saw his response at the time when I was on sick leave for a week, and I was meant to come back on the 22nd to start teaching first years, and you saw Professor Msindo's response to that. So I suppose this is now my last attempt to communicate with Rhodes University as an institution. You would have seen on the email that my family did indicate that I am on silent mode. I don't expect you to know that, but just what that means is that I am not supposed to engage with anyone regarding what has been happening to me at Rhodes. That is not something that I have authority over. That is an official family instruction. I do appreciate that you would argue that, but TMTETO, everyone comes from a different family, and therefore we can't, if we've got 2,000 employees, you can't listen to every family to say everyone is on silent mode. So I do appreciate that. However, to the extent that I met you, I bumped into you last year, and we spoke briefly about the fact that my family did say that I must come to you and actually inform you that I've been sent into your custody. And to the extent that also, as an African man, as an elder, I spoke with you when I bumped into you about what some call African psychology and what I've been doing, and what I've seen in the research I've been doing in the past 5 years, from 2018 until last year, before I joined Rhodes, the work we're doing in townships and villages. So we spoke briefly about that. And you did say, as an elder, what you said, as we spoke about, the tensions between like Western psychology and what now is being dubbed African psychology. However, as an elder, you do appreciate what I mean, to the extent that I did disclose to you, who I am in relation to the people who have given birth to me and the things that I'm wearing. That does not mean therefore I must be treated differently. No, but just means as I enter the space, as I did say to you, even in the interviews that I did with Professor Msindo as the chair of the recruitment committee, I did say that I had reached a point in my life where I know the experiences that I have prepared me enough to know that psychology as it's practiced in South Africa, in townships and in villages, actually is not helping us. Some of these things I've said them publicly, on social media. Some of these things I've tried them to come up with solutions instead of saying, okay, this is not working. I mean, I have a TV show that we piloted called The Village Shrink, that we piloted in Gauteng. We had 8 episodes. I'm known as Mteto the Village Shrink. That's my Twitter handle. That was inspired by the work I did in Mthatha when I worked at the Nelson Mandela Academic Hospital, or Tambo region, in which I could see how the clinical picture of what we were supposedly treating in the hospital was affected by the poverty, because that is like apparently the poorest region in the country. I've been in private practice, Prof, at Brianwood Therapy and Assessment Center in Bryanston, serving the people of South Africa and those who live in Gauteng who could afford our services. I have also worked in the NGO space and all of that. Like, I have enough experience in the 20 years I registered as a clinical psychologist in 2005, I think. I have been trained as a counseling psychologist as well. So my experience of being a psychologist is somewhat of a psychologist that, as Professor Chabane Manganyi would say, public interest psychology. You do appreciate our history, Prof. You do appreciate the complexity of our history and the role of psychology in that history. I did a TED Talk in 2016 that's available online, called South Africa's Unfinished Business. I think at that time it was getting clearer to me that I was getting a lot more disillusioned by the profession, and I was seeking for something. There was something else that I needed to learn. And you would notice that during that time I had like long dreadlocks, which I no longer have. But that's been part of that journey. So 2016 I did that, and then we did a TV show 2016. Then 2017 I worked at Masimanyane Women's Rights International under the leadership of Dr. Leslie Ann Foster, who was one of my references. When I applied, I had 3 references when I applied. Professor Leslie Ann Foster, who's the executive director at Masimanyane Women's Rights International, Professor Malose Langa, who's a senior lecturer and a psychologist at Rhodes University, as well as Lebohang Ramafoko, who was my boss at Soul City Institute for Social Justice. That is where I worked from 2006, when I started doing script consulting, like developing characters and helping develop characters in terms of positive masculinity and violence prevention and HIV/AIDS messages. So I am an academic, I am a scholar, I'm a clinician, I'm a researcher, but I'm also a creative, and I'm many things. But I was appointed here as a lecturer. So that happened against the backdrop of having been away for at least 5 years from the profession, not ever thinking that I would ever join the profession or rejoin the profession. And there was a family meeting in which, like I say, my family, some things are instructed to me. So I was instructed to go back to psychology, because there was tension around the interface in terms of who I am and who I want to be versus who I'm expected to be. So my family, I'll mention 3 families when I talk about my family: the Balindlelas, the Chancellors, and the Vunatis. The Vunatis, that's my maternal family. The Chancellors, that's my paternal family. And then the Balindlelas, that's the family in which I was raised by my late uncle, Sonwabo John Balindlela, who was an elder at the Old Apostolic Church. So psychology is a spiritual subject, Prof. As you know, we spoke briefly. I'm not going to repeat what we said because other people were not there. I don't know who else is going to see this. I am saying this to say coming to a Rhodes was something that I did to honor my family because they needed to guide me because of the work that I had been doing, being disillusioned. I was doing research, making music, making films in different communities, trying to figure out what else is happening in the communities that we did this research in the 3 provinces, that is Gauteng, Eastern Cape, and the Western Cape. So when it comes to that kind of work, I've been doing that kind of work since 1998. I was 20 years old when I started being a volunteer at NICRO in Belleville, and I used to work in PAL. I was doing my honors at UWC. And during that time, that's when I got to realize that I'm really about promoting mental health, violence prevention, and what has become known as positive masculinities. So that's the general background. We spoke about this when I met you, and thank you for that meeting. You will also remember that I told you about having been a Clinton Democracy Fellow in 2003. And that's a program that took us to the United States of America, where we were hosted by CTA, an NGO that is about young people serving a city for a year, hence the name CTA. That's where the idea of service actually, for me, how service could look like in marginalized communities. Obviously, the dynamics are different in the States, but that's basically who I am as a clinician. And also having majored in politics and having trained in the 90s, you would appreciate that the kind of psychology I was taught at UWC and the history of UWC in the broad spectrum of community psychology, critical psychology in this country. Maybe one thing I should say about UWC and this moment that I reflected upon before I did this, if you allow that, just 2 things. One is that I served as a vice chairperson for the Western Cape SAISA student division. And then there was Cindy, who was at UCT. And we also acted as I was an acting national vice president within SAISA. We were representing students within the board of psychology. So from that time, I was aware of how psychology as a profession is run in the country because Cindy and I had observer status. So we never spoke during those meetings, but we got all the confidential documents. So we would see the transgressions from clinicians sleeping with their patients or whatever malpractice. And I was also sadly introduced to the violence of psychology as a student then. But that opened my eyes as well to get to know that I had neither appetite nor inclination towards that kind of engagement with psychology. That then would explain why I've never really participated much within SAISA, because my objective analysis is that SAISA just became another space where, people contested spaces to lead the the association. Of course, there's been progress that has been made in psychology. But I mean, I say this without any fear of contradiction that psychology as a profession in this country, maybe even the world over, has actually failed Black people. And the psychology leadership that we have had, I mean, these are people whose work I read. Some of them taught me, some of them inspired me, but I've also publicly told them how disappointed I am in them. But I didn't do that out of disrespect or spite. I'm a part of the profession. So the 5-year period was me trying to figure out what is it that I could do to feel like I was contributing to make an impact in the marginalized communities in South Africa. That there would be townships and villages. That basically means Black people. And then the second thing that I want to share about my training at UWC, in fact, the second of the three things that I want to share quickly, is that Professor Garth Stevens, who is at Wits now, was one of my lecturers. I remember when I used to question psychology as an honor student, he used to say, but Mteto, you need to know what you critique. So you can never change who you are. You'll always be yourself, but you need to know the knowledge that we're teaching you, whether it's from America. So we read Freud, we read psychoanalytic theories, we read object relations, self-psychology, we read all the major schools of thought, cognitive behavioral therapies. We also read critical psychology, community psychology. But I used to question then as a student to say, so what is our intervention as psychologists if people are poor and are unemployed? That was my question then in 1998. I was 20 years old, I'm 46 now. But it was a very brilliant idea or very brilliant advice from Professor Garth Stevens that no, you need to critique that which you know. And then the last thing about my training that I want to share briefly is that Hamadi Kometsi is the first lecturer, even though he never taught me, he taught at UCT. He was one of the first Black lecturers that we saw to say, oh, yeah, someone who looks like us. Grootman Wakokas, I think he's from, not Kimberley, he's from the Free State at Velkom, I think he's from Velkom. He invited me to UCT from UWC, a historically Black university, UWC, to give a lecture. I was doing my first internship, which was in counseling psychology in 2000, to lecture, I think, at his honors class. And then he gave me a book as a gift and a UCT t-shirt. While I would wear this UCT t-shirt, I never doubted how great I was taught, like how great UWC was as an institution that taught me. So I never had the sense of, oh, I want to be at UWC, at UCT or at Stellenbosch. Like, I was very, very proud of being taught by the people who taught me, and I still am. That is not to say there were no it was all good, the training. There were serious limitations, especially when it comes to, for instance, neuropsychological assessment. These are found when I did my clinical internship at Stickland, and Stellenbosch University had the students doing their internship at Stickland and Tygerberg hospitals, while UWC clinical team would do their internship in Mitchell's Plain at Lentegeur. So that's when I realized that actually we're shortchanged in terms of neuropsychology. But Dr. Hamad Kometsi, I'm mentioning him for these three reasons. One, he invited me to UCT. That's where I presented. That's where Cindy, who was a student there, saw me and then invited me to serve with her as a chairperson and me as a vice chairperson in the Western Cape for SISA division. And then we were acting in the national space, in the board. But the second thing I want to share about Professor Dr. Hamad Kometsi, who's now at UJ, is that while we had like a case conference, I remember a colleague of mine Gail Washkansky, who had been a student at UCT, came to do her master's at UWC. She was meant to present and she didn't feel ready. And then she asked me if I could present my case because we were sharing, what we were doing in terms of being in the M1, in our training. Then I was like, oh, okay, cool. I presented my case. I remember sitting there because Dr. Khamati Gomitsi was Ikhotmania, was Uputwam, and who had invited me to UCT. He actually made me realize how I could actually be a scholar. So he's one person who gave me that opportunity where I could give my first lecture at UCT, and then he came with the clinical students for a case conference. I was presenting. So I presented my case. Professor Leslie Swartz was there. Louise Frankel was there, and Louise Frankel was teaching us from UCT. She was a guest lecturer. She taught us psychoanalysis. So as I presented, but then I had a wrong diagnosis. To cut a long story short, I had a wrong diagnosis because in terms of the symptoms that I actually had put together in the formulation and in the history of the client that I was presenting, my diagnosis was wrong. But I remember how vicious my Grootman, Dr. Khamati Gomitsi, was in terms of just pointing out that to say, how can you get it right in the formulation, in the history taking, in the tracking of the sessions, the clinical notes, and you get the wrong diagnosis? What were you treating? And I remember telling them that, no, I know what the correct diagnosis according to what you see would have been. And then I said it, but then I told them that I am putting the diagnosis of what I thought I was treating. And I remember Professor Leslie Swartz, whose book, interestingly, is one of the authors of a book that we are prescribed. I mean, is one of the greatest ever, I remember he said to me outside when we were having snacks, he said to me, you know what, Mteto? If you keep what you did there, and never lose it, you'll be one of the best psychologists in your life. He was talking about honesty, and not presenting to show how great you are, but to show that you are being trained so you can be honest about what you did and be receptive to feedback. And so that's the second thing about Dr. Khamati Gomitsi. But the third thing is that Dr. Khamati Gomitsi is one of the people who was evaluating the master's clinical program here at Rhodes University. And he's one of the very few people who know exactly how frustrated and how frustrating it has been for me to be this person that I am versus what I want to be versus what I can do, and trying to figure out how best can I contribute in our townships and villages. So he evaluated our course, and as you know, our course was given props by the Health Professions Council. But one of the things that was mentioned there in that evaluation is that we must have African psychology taught here. So that's the background of maybe my training in a nutshell. So at the time in 2002, I was recruited by Rhodes University as a scholar, as a junior lecturer, as what they call associate lecturer. And subsequently, I got the fellowship to go to the US, where we went to Harvard, MIT. We actually stayed at MIT at some point, went to New York University, Stanford, and all of these other universities, George Washington. I learned about service there. And I would later work for Madiba. I've told you the story about when I saw what Madiba did when I worked for the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. So I am sharing all of this background, Prof, just to say for the record that my coming here would not have happened had it not been for my family. Because they insisted that, no, you must go back to psychology. You can use your music, you can use your films to amplify psychology. But we have diviners here, we've got sangomas here, Amagqirha, we've got Amakwele, we've got people who are leaders. One of my cousins, Bongani, is going to be ordained as a bishop in July. And then my cousin, Ulisi, whose father raised me, he's a an elder in the Old Apostolic Church. So we have the spiritual gifts. So my family said, no, no, no. You are a psychologist. You must go back there. You must not fight with anyone. You must humble yourself. You must comply, but you must not conform. In my grandmother's words, she said, "Ungalibali ukuba ungumngwevu." So I am of amaNgwevu clan. Oskhomo khutilo mhlatyana oZulu. So it's been incredibly tough then to always have to remember that I am not here on my own accord, but I'm here at the instruction of my family. But I had told them of the violence of psychology as I had experienced it personally, as I had experienced it in terms of what is recorded, as I had experienced it in terms of being a practitioner and seeing how the violence in psychiatric hospitals, would be meted, and also my fair share of what I have also observed where, you would be in therapy, but things that really matter to you. I mean, I've been writing a book, so I thought by now I would have published my book. So I had to put that on hold and honor my family and come here. And I'm grateful that I did. And therefore, I want to thank you and the university for having given me the opportunity, Professor Msindo, especially Professor Jacobs, who is my HOD, because I spoke with her about my misgivings and I didn't want this, I didn't want that. And I know Rhodes University and how it was formed. I mean, I read the book, The Cult of Rhodes. We all know the history of Rhodes University. So I said to her, look, I've been doing this thing. We just need to publish this work so that students can study it. I can come present. She said, no, you can play a role here. So eventually I could see that as I was grappling with whether to come or not. And I also thought I was bringing the work that I had been doing to integrate it because I had been writing. So I thought, okay, this is going to enhance scholarship, it's going to enhance community engagement, it's going to enhance critical thinking, it's going to contribute to African psychology. I'm not saying what I know and what I've been doing is the best, but I'm just saying that's what I thought I was going to contribute. But I sacrificed 5 years of earning, Prof. My family suffered financially because of how I'm positioned there. 5 years I was doing that, and I'm grateful that they allowed for me to do that. But when I also came here, I saw community engagement and how you champion it. But like I told you in our previous meeting, what is happening in the psychology department is sad, extremely sad. I mean, I have recorded things for my family. They know exactly what the specific conversations I've had with specific people, what did they say about specific people, but I'm not interested in that. I am interested in you knowing that, one, the psychology department is not ready for African psychology. And I'm saying this as a view of how the psychology department operates and how colleagues treat each other. As for me personally, like I have been brutalized by Rhodes University. At least I know as of November, from the letter that I got from the HR accusing me of having lied in the interview, threatening to terminate my contract, and telling me that if I don't submit the proof that I was restored as a clinical psychologist by the Health Professions Council by Monday, November the 13th, they would terminate my contract. So I've always assumed the position of saying, look, because you are instructed by your family, make this work. So from November, that was my stance when I received that letter. I shared it with my family. My family even then were like, from that time, they were like, maybe you shouldn't have gone there. Maybe you shouldn't be there. I said, no. Then the irony is that this happened at the time when I actually had submitted the proof that I had passed the board exam in October, which I wrote on the 4th. I came here in August, September, October, I wrote the board exam. I passed, I got 75%, I shared it. I must also say that I had informed my colleagues, Alan Forey and Dr. Boyson, who's the clinical master's coordinator, of the fact that the board had instructed me to write an exam again, over and above the fact that I had been fine. You know, then to come to Rhodes University, for me, I thought then I'm going to be bringing the work that we had done with my team of filmmakers. These are award-winning filmmakers. And I made a plea with them to say, guys, I saw a project in Joza that has won the Community Engagement Vice Chancellor's Award. Let's include it because it falls within what we are trying to do, which is to promote mental health, violence prevention, and positive masculinities in township, even though specifically this was around mental health. And I liked the integration of counseling, clinical, as well as the student counseling. I mean, I've never seen this anywhere I've been, like I said. So I was overwhelmed. I was even in tears after I saw that, because I thought, okay, this is what I needed to see. Had I not honored my family, had I not come, you know, as per the instruction, especially from my grandmother, I would not have seen that. I never wanted any money from the research directorate, even though I knew that I could access some funds that are linked to my research plan that I submitted for 3 years, because I wanted to show and contribute and say to my colleagues, here is the skill set that I have. These are the people that I've brought. We've elevated this. That would have been my way of saying, okay, this is what I am bringing, which I had said in the interview. Needless to say, in November, I received this disturbing thing from HR. In December, I get a call from an investigator from the Health Professions Council, because as I got to hear in January that it actually was Dr. Dwayne Boyson. And later on, I got to hear, including Alan Foree, who reported me. They were smiling with me. They were, you know. I then had conversations even with Professor Msindo, even Professor Jacobs, until I realized that in actual fact, I cannot trust anyone at Rhodes University. From HR, based on their letter in November, from Professor Msindo, who when I met him, when I met him in January, he asked if it was Dwayne Boyson who actually reported me. I said, no, I don't want you to ask me about names, Prof. I'm talking to you as an African elder. I want to make this relationship work. So from where I'm sitting, including the conversations I've had with Professor Jacobs about staff members in the department, including things that have happened in the psychology department, you know, where I had a meeting with Professor Jacobs, who's the HOD, with Dr. Kamungaidze Trust, who's the deputy HOD, and the things that are happening to our 2 colleagues who have had to be hospitalized because of whatever they have had. So I suppose for me, when I then got to a point of saying, okay, I'm protesting, people didn't understand that. That's fine, it's not for them to understand. I suppose that for me is something that I would subject myself to any other process that you would see fit as an institution. However, I must say, in the meeting we had, which I was reluctant to attend on the 22nd of last month, that Monday when I came back from sick leave, Professor Msindo was there, Ndosh was there. I was seeing her for the first time. You know, I'm mentioning her because I had to speak in isiXhosa with her, because I could see that these people are playing whatever game that they are playing with whatever rules that they are playing. I did say to Professor Msindo, as somebody who facilitated the interviewing process of me coming to Rhodes, he then needs to facilitate me exiting Rhodes, because it's clear that my relationship with the institution has now hit rock bottom, and I have no regrets about having come here. I'm coming to you now as the accounting officer of the institution, Prof, to say, all things considered, I have no reason to trust Professor Msindo based on the specific things that I can submit to the institution, even in his presence. that would then require me having to even say things that I would not want to say about the things that Professor Msindo has said. The same thing about Professor Jacobs. And this is not to threaten people. I mean, I'm talking about things that are verifiable. The same with other senior colleagues, but I'm not interested in that simply because of the instruction from home, simply because of the processes that I'm undergoing. And I have told my colleagues that to say, look, I don't think you are ready for African psychology. I submitted to them. I copied Gary Steele, Dr. Steele. I copied Sandy Sobazana. I copied the HOT, obviously, and I copied Dr. Trust Kabungainze, saying to them how I think African psychology should work. So I don't think the psychology department is ready for that. Like I said to you, there has to be a consideration of an external intervention. And I hope everybody in the psychology department would talk and speak freely about what they are going through in that department, including the HOD. So I have no angry feelings towards anyone. I am disappointed. Of course, I have been hurt by the fact that I had now to suffer my own. I mean, from last year, I've been attending physio as a consequence of stress. I have been put on sick leave twice by Dr. Ordenthal for 2 days and for a week on stress. I have had to see a psychologist in East London. And these things are dangerous, Prof. Psychological torture is a thing, it's a thing. I'm just gonna read you something about psychological torture that I want you to think about. That people who psychologically torture you don't matter they are victims. They destroy them psychologically and leave them broken. Then they gaslight their victim and everyone else into thinking they did not do anything. It's the most diabolical form of abuse and psychological murder. They will never recognize what they did to you. If you want any kind of justice for what they did, you gotta get loud about it. You just have to keep on insisting that they committed a horrible crime against you, no matter how much they try to act like you are crazy or you are exaggerating. Of the 2 colleagues that were in hospital, I know for a fact that one of them was a victim of this, based on things that I can verify. And if people think that they are going to victimize me because I am refusing to participate in their factional politics in this institution, my family will take this as loud as it possibly should go. If people are going to try and make me to be a difficult person, to be a persona non grata with no integrity, question my integrity to the students, position me, and disrespect the contribution that I've made in this profession, let alone the sacrifices my family. Prof, I can promise you one thing, it's gonna get so loud and it's on you as a head and as the ultimate accounting officer. And this is not a threat to you. This is just an issue of when my grandmother says to me, "Ubaxelele ke abo bantu bawuliqaba laseQumrha." That is a very loaded statement because it talks about my heritage. It talks about the totality of what my own family has gone through in terms of white supremacy in this country, where my family, my ancestors were murdered as farm owners. And my grandfather and my father died as farm workers. And my grandmother is still asking, when is that gonna be, finalized? I mean, is she gonna die at 105 with that? That's the responsibility I carry because I happen to be one of the people who have been blessed with education. So people must forget that they are gonna practice a way of relating with other people through domination, dehumanization, brutalization, not on me. Not because of any reason other than the fact that that will be dishonoring my family. And the saddest of things now for me is that while all of this is happening, there is also this parallel process that I declared to you, Professor Msindo and Dr. Trust Kabungainze, about what I'm being taught spiritually. But it ends now, Prof. I mean, I don't have to suffer any further than this. I'm just appealing to you to say, you need to figure out a way to help me exit your institution. I said to Professor Msindo, they need to consider finding a way of me. I mean, he referred me to HR, the same HR that said I lied in the interview, the same HR that threatened me. The same HR Professor Msindo told me in January that he had told them how to approach this thing. The same way Dwayne Boyson, apparently there was a meeting where Professor Msindo had told him and Alan and whoever reported me to the Health Professions Council to let me be to write the exam in October, even after I passed, when Professor Jacobs told me how relieved she was because of how brutalized she was because of my appointment. I am not here to fight any factions. I'm not here to solve any problems of the department. I'm here to contribute as a staff member. I am here to work with my colleagues, but since I came here last year, I have not been afforded that opportunity. I've been brutalized from that time, and this stops now. I've got nothing else to prove. There's nothing else that I want from Rhodes University. If Rhodes University doesn't want me, I told Professor Msindo and his committee that one of the reasons I actually came to Rhodes was seeing Mama Matosini, may she rest in peace, in Kunze Mdaga, and the honor that has been bestowed on SK kwaye and Sis Nobel because I was like, okay, the university is transforming, and obviously with its history, we can be accepted in the institution. So if I'm going to be brutalized as an African man who's undergoing a serious African spiritual process that I have had to declare, which I didn't have to, while the university is saying, okay, it's against racism, it's against homophobia, it accepts everyone. I can tell you one thing, I have not been accepted at Rhodes University. And that's okay, because it is what it is. But what is not going to happen is people are not going to act as if that has not happened. So I'm subjecting myself to any process that you would see fit, insofar as, you know, what has happened. Like, I have no interest to talk to Professor Msindo again about my being here. I cannot trust him. I say this respectfully, the same with Professor Jacobs. I cannot trust her. What is nice is that I told them as far back as December last year, and they have pledged their support with Dr. Trust Kabungainze, Dr. Steele, when he was Deputy HOD, and the HOD, against what the HR had said about me in November. So how are they supporting me if I lied in the interview? So like I say, on God, before I'm an employee, before I'm a worker, I'm a human being first in South Africa. This is 2024. So everyone whose name I have mentioned here, I just want you to know I have no qualms against them. I carry no ill feelings towards them. They have their own journeys. They know exactly what has happened. And I have nothing else to prove. I don't have to prove anything to anyone. The psychology profession, you know, has got to transform. I mean, I'll just end this by reading something that I told even the HR to read. This book by Kopano Ratele. He writes in his author's note that a decade ago, this was published in 2019, so that means in 2009, he says a decade ago, I would not have advised anyone to study psychology. Psychology, I would have said, is bad for your mental health, and were it to turn that being a psychologist is good for your economic status, the likelihood is that you would be supporting the marginalization of people who most need psychological help. Today, I have reassessed my attitude towards psychology. Today, if a student is adamant that he wants to study psychology, having made him aware of the discipline's history and contemporary complicity with coloniality, racism, apartheid, and Euro-American centricity, and having made sure he understands how many psychologists tend to remain silent in the face of psychological torture and oppression, I will not say, do not study psychology. I will say, do not forget to study how psychology studies people. Do not forget yourself. Do not forget the people who need your help but cannot afford the ridiculous fees. Reach beyond what psychology teaches you about healing, for only then you will be able to recognize that the psychological healers themselves, especially those whose colonial and apartheid wounding has not received any attention, need healing. Reach beyond how this field in which you want expertise wants you to study humans, wants you to act towards people, other animals, plants, other living beings, and the universe. Study beyond its methods, interpretations, theories, and conclusions. Pay attention to its assumptions and do not get entrapped by them. To the way those who call themselves psychologists approach people and the world around them, to how those who call themselves psychotherapists go about trying to heal people and themselves. Most of all, don't be satisfied with American psychology in Africa. Search for Africa in psychological theories. Build a cultural home for Africans in psychology, which is to say, build a psychology that centers Africa, a conscious, critical, reflective African psychology. Do not believe anyone who seeks to dismiss your search for psychology that centers your experience, your knowledge, your cultural connectedness, your being as a person living in an African country. The idea of African psychology appears to be simple and straightforward, to be a simple and straightforward matter, except that is often not. The latter situation, where there is confusion more than clarity, is usually the state of affairs. So, perhaps the last thing for me that I want to share is from this book by Professor Manganyi, Apartheid and the Making of a Black Psychologist, his memoir. Both him and Professor Kopano Ratele, as you know, Prof, they are recipient of the Social Change Project in our department. And interestingly, even our students at Masters, as of this year, when I asked them in our first lecture, do they know of Professor Manganyi, they said they don't know. Clinical psychology master's students in our department this year said they don't know of Professor Manganyi, the first African Black psychologist in South Africa. So this is an email that Professor Leslie Swartz wrote in 2011 to Professor Manganyi. He says, there is to me an irony that many so-called radicals in the ivory tower of psychology are people who do not try to engage with the limits of what psychology can or cannot do in practice. It is so easy to pontificate on what is wrong or ideologically compromised. It is far more difficult to try to do things within a context of having to compromise constantly. I think that somehow the really exciting space for critique, which we were all part of, became separated in the transition in South Africa from the praxis of trying to do new things. I have little doubt in my mind that South African psychology has become more conservative and market-driven than in the 1980s. This is such an indictment on our profession. This was in 2011. And we have to listen to what Professor Leslie Swartz has to say, given who he is. And Professor Manganyi put this correspondence for us to read. When I said to you, Prof, I'm blessed, this is going to punctuate that point, again from Professor Manganyi on page 123 on this book, which he wrote after having delivered the lecture here at Rhodes. Professor Manganyi goes, I quote, "As I understood the situation at the time, the practice of public interest clinical psychology finds its most compelling foundations and legitimation in the promotion of the mental health interests of all people, black and white, rich and poor. The public interest platform is one that I, given a second chance to work as a clinical psychologist, would consider undoubtedly relevant even today. So what Professor Manganyi calls public interest platform, that he would do it again if he had a chance. So he's in his 70s now, probably 80s, I don't know. I feel blessed that I have tried what I've tried in the 5-year period, grounding what I've been studying into finding solutions rather than finding complaints. Like Professor Swartz is saying, finding innovation. So no one is going to distract me from that. So I think my coming here has reaffirmed that. So I'm thankful to my family and I'm thankful to Rhodes University. I'm certain that things have come to become the way they are. So, Prof, I mean, all in all, like, we're just continuing, with the wisdom of the likes of Ratele, Manganyi, but being mindful of how violent psychology is. So I can't take it any further than this. So I need to exit your institution. I hope you can guide the process. Thank you.